All right. Well, good morning, everybody. This is Joe Mo Stewart here at the Fairbanks Economic Development Corporation, joined by Mr. Roger Burgraff and Ms. Katie Yarrow. It is Thursday, February 8th. We're convened for a special off-schedule meeting to hear from Mr. Joe Balash. I believe are you Vice President for External Affairs? Senior Vice President for External Affairs?
That's right.
All right, over at Santos, here to discuss the exciting Pikka project going down on the North Slope. Without further ado, I'll let you fill in some of the blanks on your resume, Mr. Former Deputy Commissioner. Yeah, we'll get the show on the road. As usual, just so you know, my second TV isn't working, so I'm going to be having troubles monitoring the chat line. So if you have any questions or any comments, don't be shy. Just go ahead and throw up your hand, or just go ahead and take yourself on mute and fire away. Okay? All right. Without further ado, Mr. Balash, please.
All right. Well, thank you, Jomo. As he said, my name is Joe Balash. I handle external affairs for my company. We're called Santos. I'll talk a little bit more about where we're from and what we're about. I am down in Anchorage in our offices here, but I grew up in the interior, graduated from Ben Eielson Senior High School, and spent the first part of my professional career working for my local legislator there in North Pole. I've spent a long time in government service, first in Juneau as legislative staff, then moved over to the executive branch, worked for a couple of governors, worked at the Department of Natural Resources. The last job I had there was commissioner. I then did what I refer to as a 5-year tour of duty in Washington, D.C., nation's capital, working first as Senator Sullivan's chief of staff, and then serving in the Department of the Interior as the Assistant Secretary for Land and Minerals, which had oversight of BOEM and Bessie in the offshore, the Office of Surface Mining for the SMACRA coal program for the nation, as well as the Bureau of Land Management. So when presented an opportunity to come home to Alaska and work on a project that I knew to be very important for the future of the state and the people I love, it was impossible to say no. So I returned to Alaska in 2019, and very excited to talk about this project, how we're going about it as a company, and what it means for the future of Alaska. So with that, the slides that I'm using today are the same slides that we used in a briefing in Juneau earlier this week for the Senate Resources Committee. So you can see there the title slide says as much. I did have a colleague join me on some of these, and so there may be a couple here and there that I might not present as smoothly. Please forgive the rough cut, but I think I can probably answer questions on most of it. And that said, this first slide, the cover photo is taken by a drone just about 2 weeks ago. It is situated above the Nanushuk production facility pad. What you can see there are a number of supports that have been installed in a gravel pad. Those supports will be for the production facility modules that are being fabricated in Western Canada and trucked to location and assembled kind of like Legos. But we'll talk a little bit more about that. Let me just see how I'm going to be able to navigate. There we go. So about Santos. We have nothing to do with the former congressman. We are an Australian oil and gas company. Santos is not a Spanish word. It's an acronym. Stands for South Australia Northern Territories Oil Search. Despite Oil Search, the OS, Santos has not had much of a history with oil. It's primarily a gas company, one of the largest domestic suppliers in Australia, as well as a significant exporter of LNG. We have a global presence with assets in not only Australia, but Timor-Leste, Papua New Guinea, as well as Alaska. Globally, we have around 4,000 employees. We continue to add to that number here in Alaska, where we are a 51-49 partner with a Spanish company named Repsol. We have cultivated very strong support with some of our key stakeholders, in particular, the native village of Nuiqsut and their regional or their village corporation, Kukpik. And our current org chart is authorized for 259 positions. And there's a big difference between our org chart and all of the contractors working to execute the project up on the slope. We have more than 1,000 people up there now. We have 1,200 beds for the winter. Those aren't our employees, though. This 259 figure are the org chart personnel. And that number is going to grow over the next year as we bring on the operators who will actually run the production facilities once we achieve first oil. For those of you who visit Anchorage now and then, we're currently in the building that was formerly the BP building, but it's quite empty over here. We are going to be relocating downtown to what used to be the Key Bank building, occupying most of the floors there, and looking forward to being a part of the revitalization of the downtown area here in Anchorage. Pikka is an exciting play. The Nanushuk Formation was discovered in 2013, back when Repsol was the operator and Armstrong was the other partner. And there was an additional well drilled a few years later in 2017 that confirmed this is a giant oil field. And giant is a particular term used in the oil and gas industry to signify that it's more than 500 million barrels. So that is a key aspect of this particular opportunity. But our company, and I'll talk more about this in some of the later slides, but our company has a commitment to be a constructive participant in the energy transition. We've made a commitment to be net zero on this project, at least with regard to our equity share of the Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions. We do have a land position that extends well beyond Pikka. Our core area of focus is primarily on state land, and that makes a big difference in terms of navigating some of the regulatory requirements. We have made agreements and commitments to the people in the area closest to the project as well as the region. We have, as part of our project development, invested in significant infrastructure for the village of Nuiqsut in particular, a wastewater treatment plant. We've replaced a bridge to improve stream flow and aid in fish passage and fish rearing. And then also, as part of our development footprint in the project area, have installed a boat ramp to provide access on the east side of the Colville River, and that will give members of the community in Nuiqsut access to the road system for a larger period of months in the calendar year. So that makes a tremendous difference in their ability to engage in commerce and visit Fairbanks as opposed to flying all the way down to Anchorage for healthcare, groceries, hardware, you name it. So Just to zoom in a little bit on the core area I was talking about, this map is from the central north slope, and you can see, moving east to west. The far east there is Badami, and as you travel across, you see in blue there, that's the Prudhoe Bay unit. Then the big sort of pinkish color is Kaparik, and then you see Pikka at the top there in gold, and then continues on in red to Alpine, Greater Moose's Tooth, and Willow in NPRA. So Pikka is what we are focused on right now in terms of execution. But as you go kind of clockwise, you see there's the Quokka unit and the Horseshoe unit. The pale yellow color is acreage that we hold, but is non-unitized. Now, the reason there's a difference is the Quokka unit, the Horseshoe unit, both have discoveries on them. And they have discoveries that we're very excited about once we get through the initial development at Pikka. We do have additional acreage positions that aren't reflected on this map, but they are not our key focus. They're just part of a long-term opportunity set.
So I would remind the group as we jump into the meat and potatoes. Again, this is for all our mutual benefit. If you have any questions, you can go ahead and just take yourself off mute and fire away. I'm not actually monitoring the participant list or the chat box so that I can see the slides ourselves here in the room. So again, if you have a question, please just go ahead and take yourself off mute and fire away. Thanks, Joe.
So we announced final investment on Pikka back in August of 2022. Our company, as well as our partner, it required board level action. The decision itself commits both companies to spend $2.6 billion to get to first oil. Once we've achieved first oil, we'll have revenue that then helps fund the ongoing drilling that is required to fully drill out this phase 1 block of wells. And that altogether will take us past $3 billion, but to get to first oil is going to cost around 2.6. We immediately undertook major contracting, and in about a year ago, we had completed all of our major contract awards. And there are 5 key awards in that regard. We're pleased that a number of those contracts have been awarded to union shops. I see Jacob on. I think it's fair to say the halls are pretty empty right now between what we've got going on, what Willow's got going on, and then just the regular order of business on the slope. I think we've put a lot of folks to work so far, and pretty pleased with that. You can see in this picture the Parker 272 drill rig. That was our very first award. Parker's have joined together with Kukbik in a partnership to make this rig available to us. We spent the winter of 22 and 23 modernizing, upgrading, making sure that the rig was capable of drilling the wells that we require. We were able to mobilize that in April of 23, and by June had the rig drilling our first well, which was a disposal well. Altogether, that rig's going to drill 45 wells for us on this phase of the project. It'll produce 397 million barrels in this initial development. A variety of these wells are, going to be short, but most of them are going to be fairly long. The reason they're going to be long is that we agreed to move our pad for the drilling site further away from the Colville River in response to community concerns from the residents in Nuiqsut. Because we moved it further away, that makes the wells longer. It makes them a little more technically complex. It also has a material difference in our cost. But that is all something we consider to be a worthwhile investment in order to be responsive to those concerns. The processing facility I mentioned is uh, an approach that has not really been utilized all that much on the North Slope. It's a modular design where the kit is basically assembled in a yard in Western Canada by a company that's done this for more than a decade. And this is basically taking advantage of a standardized approach where you buy in bulk and are able to bring down your cost as a result. There's a number of other benefits that I'll talk about in a bit more detail in a couple of slides. But as I mentioned earlier, we have just around 1,200 beds on the slope this year. We often are asked, are we having a hard time finding people to work? I don't know the direct answer to that. All I know is our camp is full. Our camps are full. There's about 12 of them. So we expect to achieve first oil by the second quarter of 2026. That's what we've told the market. And it'll be 80,000 barrels per day that goes into TAPS. Now, that's an important number because for those of you keeping track, TAPS currently is producing or carrying less than 500,000 barrels per day today. This is going to be a significant improvement in the throughput. And when the throughput goes up, the charges that are levied against the oil are reduced. By our calculations, our estimates, our contribution to TAPS is going to reduce the tariff by $1.15 for the first 10 years. And what that means is every barrel in TAPS becomes more valuable as a consequence. It's like changing the price by $1.15. And that's good for the value of oil that currently is in production, that pays royalty, that pays taxes, and so that will help in an indirect way improve the treasury figure for the state of Alaska. Local content is something we strive to maximize, and in particular through the award of our contracts. And you know, our project is a little bit unique from others on the North Slope in that while the leases we are producing are state leases, the surface land is owned by Kukpik, the village corporation for Nuiqsut. And so back in 2019, we entered into a land use agreement with Kukpik. And that agreement is founded on the concerns for subsistence resources in the area that the village pays very close attention to. And so, the agreement is basically built around how we as a company go about prosecuting the project, but in a way that protects the subsistence resources and also provides for access to those resources for the residents. A feature of the agreement is that we allow the Kukpik to provide what are called subsistence representatives who are in our camp and have access to any part of the project area at all times. They can see anything they want. They report back to Kukpik, and that is basically the way that the community and the village corp keep an eye on us and make sure that we're living up to not only the letter of our permits, but also the spirit of our agreement. And so that's a key piece for us. And while we don't have any explicit, additional points that Kukpik is awarded in the contracting process, we do give strong consideration to Kukpik affiliated bidders when we submit our bids on the street. They've done well. They have lost some bids. They've won some bids. And as a result, you can see in this wheel at the bottom, in the middle, that Alaska Native vendors have gotten a bit of our spend so far. Other Alaska vendors have, and then there's the non-Alaska vendors. And it's important to understand the non-Alaska vendors piece of this because 6 months prior, it was actually a bigger wedge, and that's because of the stage of the project we were at then, which was going out and buying stuff. We have to buy pipeline, we have to buy steel for the vertical support members, and all of that material is in other places. So as we went out and purchased those things, that showed up in a big piece of our spend, at least at that point in time. As we continue to proceed through construction activities, these blue wedges are going to grow and become bigger and bigger percentages of the total spend. But as a company, we want to be transparent about what we are doing, but also how we are impacting the Alaska contractor base and the Alaska economy writ large.
I mean, the reality is we do a lot of things here, but we don't necessarily manufacture all the things you need here.
That's right. If there were an Alaska vendor that made pipe, I'm sure we would take a look at it. But as many of you probably know, the yard over at Flowline is quite full, quite busy. And between the work that we're doing and the work out at Willow, I think they're going to be quite busy for some time. So we also have a couple of welding shops there in the interior, both Universal out in North Pole and the welding shop up in Fox, making our VSMs, our vertical support members. So we had to buy the steel somewhere else. We brought it here, and they are, manufacturing those VSMs for us. So just a little bit on the tax and royalty impacts. As I mentioned, these are state leases that pay a royalty. And that means we will be, making pretty big deposits into both the state treasury, but also the permanent fund. A portion of the royalty is payable to Arctic Slope Regional Corporation. That means that those funds are subject to 7I of ANCSA and will be shared with the other regions. And under 7J, pushed down to our village corps like Minto. Hi, Doug. So we can quite credibly say that every ANCSA shareholder in Alaska is going to benefit from Pikka Phase 1, something we're proud of. All in, between royalties, production taxes, property taxes, and corporate income taxes, we estimate on a conservative long-term price of $65 a barrel that Pikka Phase 1 will contribute nearly $7 billion to the Treasury. So I talked a bit about our production facility and the modular approach we're taking. And there's a number of benefits that we saw, and it's the reason why we opted to pursue this approach. You can see on the map on the right, the facilities are being constructed in a yard north of Calgary and are then able to be, for the most part, fit on trucks and moved by truck on the Alaska Highway and ultimately up the Dalton Highway to location. There are some modules that are a little bit bigger, and so they're being transported up to the Hay River for a river lift and then on to the Beaufort Sea. They'll travel east to west and be landed at Licktock Point for delivery over crawlers to the Pikka location. We do have a couple of the modules that are also being taken over to Port Stewart, which isn't shown on this map, but that is allowing them to go by barge up to Valdez and then transit the Richardson Highway on up to the Alcan and Dalton highways. So we are making the most of the transportation infrastructure here in Alaska. And of key concern for us is the maintenance and condition of the Dalton Highway. We're working very closely with DOT to make sure that they have what they need to be able to keep the road in as good a condition as you can expect for a gravel highway, an industrial highway that's in the Arctic and traversing some pretty rugged terrain. Some of the benefits of this modular approach, I mentioned already, the cost improvement for us. We estimate that this is at least a $200 million savings, possibly $300 million savings over a large singular module built in a shipyard and then brought in during open water season. The reason that's important for Alaskans is that under the state's production tax system, all of the costs associated with our project are lease expenditures under the production tax code. And if we save $200 million in spend, that's a difference at the 35% marginal rate of somewhere between $70 and $100 million in production tax revenue that would be eaten up through the course of deductions. So when we save money, the state saves money as well, and it's good for both of us. The truckable approach also has the consequence of reducing our risk. If we were restricted to open water season to transport the modules to location, if there's any sort of delay in construction in the yard, when you're restricted to the open water season, sometimes a 1-month delay means a 1-year delay because you've missed your window. By having surface access to the location, we're able to access year round. We're able to more evenly space the deliveries of these modules. It helps keep a more steady workforce, both from the transportation side, but also the assembly side up at the pad. And ultimately that steadier pace of work is good for the contractors as well as the employees, so that they can count on a more steady dose of work, and hopefully, more of them are Alaskans and or they stay in Alaska as opposed to having to go find additional work outside. So I can touch on a few other things here.
Actually, Joe, if you don't mind, again, you mentioned that this project, as you all are moving it forward, is maybe a bit more reliant on trucking than the project might otherwise be. We've been having a rather robust discussion relative to trucking here in the interior the last couple of years, and a bill just got dropped on weight limits. Would that impact your project at all? Have you seen this thing yet?
We're reviewing that.
Okay.
But my expectation is yes, we would be potentially impacted by that, and I don't think we'd be alone. So, I've learned a lot more about DOT permitting for weights and measures than I ever thought I would care to know. And we have a great set of folks there at DOT who handle all of that, but it's certainly an important aspect of our ability to move forward here economically. If we we're restricted to going around the state via barge and limited to the open water season, that just introduces any number of additional risks and costs that make it harder to do these sorts of things.
Thanks.
So one other benefit of this approach to these production facilities is that, you know, we are utilizing them in a way that is easily replicated. And so for phase one, we're actually using two 40,000 barrel per day processing units. And our plans are to move into phase two rather quickly. We've already stood up a team to do that, and we will basically just mirror the phase one facilities on the other side of the production facility pad that's in place on the slope already. And so it really is something that we think is going to be repeatable. And anytime you're doing something, you know, for the second, third, or fourth time, you get better at it, and it becomes a more efficient process and endeavor. So our plans for phase two would roughly double our production from 80,000 to 160,000 barrels per day. The team is already working on those plans. The footprint has already been permitted in the original scope of this project, so we don't need to go through any additional NEPA or federal permitting to move ahead with phase two. And our goal is to be FID ready as soon as we achieve first oil, so that the proceeds from phase one basically pay for phase two. And
Mentioned that a couple of times, and that's a neat model. Again, that, you know, the way you've set this up, that, you know, the first phase not only, you know, starts making a return on investment, but also has enough left over to help finance the next phase.
well, Jomo, it is great, but there's more.
But wait, there's more. I would just remind the group again, if you have any questions or comments, this is not the Jomo Stewart Show. Please feel free to ask your questions. Just go ahead and throw your, yeah, don't even bother throwing your hands up. I'm not looking at the participant list. Just go ahead and take yourself off mute and fire away. Thanks.
So this slide is one that we presented at an investor day presentation in Sydney back at the end of 2023, and it's the first time we've done this publicly. But we've identified here all of the running room that we see in this Nanoshook play on the acreage that we currently hold. And I mentioned, you know, we have the Pikka unit that we're developing right now, as well as Quokka and Horseshoe. And so what you can see on the left is what we see in the future. That bottom blue, the sort of bright blue, is Pikka phase one. The darker blue is Pikka phase two. And we have discoveries at Quokka and Horseshoe. We know that the oil is there. We need to do additional delineation drilling to firm up the precise amount and be able to properly size and scope our developments for those areas. But, you know, we see a future where as long as the world continues to value hydrocarbons, as long as the government maintains a reasonable regulatory and fiscal environment, and we have a level playing field, we will be in a position that we can take another final investment decision every 3 to 4 years and move in these 80,000 barrel per day increments over time. And so we're very excited with what we already believe we have. We think it adds up to a very bright future for Alaska, as well as ourselves, and could not be more excited about what that means for all of us. And, you know, I mentioned my work history earlier at the top. when I served in government positions, I kind of got used to companies, coming to Alaska and, giving us a nice song and dance, and, telling us how great we were. But, I always made a point of looking to see how that company talked about Alaska outside of Alaska. I thought that was probably um, more accurate as to how they thought about us. And so I've got this next slide coming from that same Investor Day deck. And this is how we talk about Alaska in Australia. We see Alaska as being a world-class resource base, a tier 1 jurisdiction, that we're going to be able to generate significant free cash flow that will allow us to not only fund our future developments, but also return cash to our shareholders, which is a pretty important thing in business. That we're able to leverage significant infrastructure, TAPS, Dalton Highway. And we've got a team that has been built up with tremendous Alaska experience, and that there's a stable regulatory environment with supportive stakeholders. That's how we see Alaska. That's how we talk about it to our investors and our shareholders. And so we're very pleased to be here, and look forward to a bright future. Now, I mentioned earlier that we have made a commitment to have our equity share of the emissions at Pikka offset, that we will be net zero. It was included in our announcement at FID in August of 22, and it's something that as a company, we've made some really big commitments on as well. And so I'm going to spend the next several slides talking about that. Just for those of you who might not be familiar with the scope 1, 2, and 3 method of measuring emissions, this was developed by the EPA some years ago, is now basically the global standard for how to account for emissions in the environment and in the economy. So I put this in the context of Santos here in Alaska. So scope 1 emissions are the ones that we cause by combusting fuel directly up at our project location primarily. And so that's why you see the drill rig, the trucks, everything. Scope 2 are the emissions that we're indirectly responsible for. Others have combusted fuel on our behalf, and that is primarily for our heat and power in our office here in Anchorage. Scope 3 emissions are those caused after we have sold our products, and so that's the what we refer to as the downstream emissions. So if we sell oil to a refiner, the refiner turns that into gasoline, it then gets used in a car. Those are scope 3 emissions. And the way this all works is if, the way the theory goes, if everybody accounts for their scope 1 and 2 emissions, there are no scope 3 emissions. So we are focused on offsetting our scope 1 and 2 emissions. And as we look to the future, we see a real business opportunity, not only in Australia, but globally, in providing what we call carbon services to help others offset and decarbonize their industries. So Vision 2040. This is a model that we adopted as a company back in 2022. It establishes a 3-horizon plan for how it is we are going to go about developing our business. And you see, the phase we're in right now is backfill and sustain. That is, continuing to produce energy to generate revenue for our company that is then invested in the next phase, which is decarbonization. So we as a company operating in Australia have been dealing with a regulatory regime, a cap and trade system in Australia, basically, that has caused us to develop a certain degree of experience and expertise that we're bringing to bear on the decarbonization effort. And then ultimately in the next decade, develop low carbon fuels that will help reduce emissions even further around the world. So specifically here in Alaska, in order to decarbonize, our very first option and choice is to avoid emissions. That comes through the overall design of our project. And at Pikka, we are going to install natural gas turbines to generate electricity to power the entire field. It will run the drill rig. It will run the grind and inject facility. It'll run the production facility as well as our camps. We'll have a smaller turbine up at our seawater treatment plant to run that plant as well. We are going to be importing natural gas from Prudhoe Bay in order to fuel that turbine. The gas associated with our oil production is going to be captured and re-injected as part of the overall recovery process. So again, first step is let's reduce the emissions that we generate in that Scope 1 arena. The next step for us is to reduce those emissions. And so even though we've got a set design and are executing against that, we're continually looking for opportunities to further reduce our emissions, whether that's engaging in a carbon point source capture opportunity at the emission stack on our turbine, or any other opportunity. Whatever we have left in terms of CO2 emissions, we then look for offsets to make up for the emissions that we're putting into the atmosphere. And you can do that one of two ways. There are nature-based approaches and there are technology-based approaches. And many of you have heard a little bit about nature-based approaches. Last year, the legislature adopted a piece of legislation proposed by the governor to make state forest lands available for improved forest management projects. A number of the ANCSA corporations around the state have also engaged in those, and so that's just one of the nature-based approaches available.
I know you can't tell me, but I would love to know how much your gas is going to cost. Never mind.
You're right. You're right.
No, I've got my natural gas utility person sitting next to me, and I know how much they're paying for their feedstock. I'd love to know if you got or what kind of deal they're getting.
Yeah, we're buying our gas from somebody else.
Okay.
So, Joe, one of the questions I have, if I could, Jomo,
Yeah,
Sure.
please.
is the decarbonization an issue right now that you need local assist? It's ironic because 2 meetings ago this morning, Bob Smith's name came up in a conversation, and one of our consultants works very closely with him. And I'm wondering if there's somehow we could also assist you if there is an issue that could be addressed. Bob, I guess, is going to be heading up the carbon capture at DOE.
At DOE?
Yeah.
So we are part of a consortium, and I'll talk a bit more about that here in a minute. But we are well on our way to having secured the offsets we need for phase 1. But in the longer term, there are definitely some things that we are pursuing that would potentially leverage DOE further, and so we'll come back to that, Doug. But this slide helps illustrate our approach overall. So as I mentioned before, we've minimized our CO2 emissions by design, not only using very efficient turbines, but also adding waste heat recovery units, and all in that gets us to a certain carbon intensity number, which is measuring the amount of carbon emitted per barrel of oil produced. And so we have a very high performing project in that regard. So what you see on the right hand side, sort of that bar chart that starts low, goes high, we are in the top quartile of projects worldwide when it comes to carbon intensity per barrel. And so we think that's important in absolute terms, but also when it comes to what we refer to as, policy resiliency, meaning whatever change might occur in the future here in the US or anywhere else, if there is a tax put on carbon, a fee, what have you, we've already taken steps to minimize the amount of carbon we are emitting, and therefore, if there's a change and we have to start paying a fee, it won't do much damage to our economics overall. In fact, we price in a certain amount per ton of carbon emitted in our projects before we go forward to make sure that we are resilient to policy change.
Hey, Joe,
with all of, yes?
do you know off the top of your head what that one on the far right is?
It is, as I recall, some of those projects on the far right are onshore projects in Asia, Russia regions. There are a couple of African projects onshore as well there. What you'll find is offshore projects tend to have pretty good metrics, but it depends in part on the regime in place.
Thank you.
And this bar chart is assembled from a tool that Wood Mackenzie provides. They're a global analytics firm that specializes in the oil and gas industry. So, so in terms of alignment with the Paris Agreement, one thing that we take into account is, even under some of the most aggressive climate models adopted or used to analyze the situation, now there's an expectation that hydrocarbons are going to continue to be needed long into the future. It's going to be those projects that have the lowest emissions relative to their profit that are going to survive and continue to move forward. And so we believe our project here in Alaska, as well as these other opportunities we have in Alaska, are Paris aligned. In order to effectuate that beyond our Scope 1 and Scope 2 emissions, as a company, we only sell our product to customers who are either in a Paris aligned country, or that customer is Paris aligned. And so while there are a number of advocates that believe oil and gas companies should be responsible for their Tier 3 emissions, we think it's a more effective way forward to make sure we only sell our products to countries or customers that are Paris aligned. So I mentioned there are post-design emission reduction strategies that we can undertake for carbon abatement. You see here examples of that in some of our Australian projects and facilities. Whether it's utilizing alternative methods of generating electricity, or other efficiency factors, waste heat recovery and the like. Those are things that we're going to continue to evaluate even as we move into operations. And obviously on the North Slope, there's a period of about 6 weeks where there's absolutely no sunlight, so solar might not be the best option. But it doesn't necessarily preclude that, since there are so many other months where there's tremendous amounts of sunlight. So, we will be evaluating all of these options, and looking for the lowest cost opportunities to offset our emissions.
It's neat that you have this slide, because I was going to ask that when you mentioned, again, making electricity using natural gas. Again, on the North Slope, where you do have a chunk of the year where you have, again, as you noted, tremendous sunshine. It looks like you all are doing that in Australia.
That's right.
Cool.
In Australia, we've had to figure out how to keep those solar panels clear of sand in the desert.
Dust.
But we'll deal with a different set of challenges on the slope. Again, I mentioned this before, but nature-based offsets are our primary option right now for offsets here in Alaska. Our goal is, to find offsets in the jurisdiction where we're generating the emission. And so at the time we took FID back in 2022, state lands were not available for these improved forest management projects. So we entered into a letter of intent with a very large ANCSA company. Ordinarily, our partners of first priority are Arctic Slope Regional Corporation and Kukvik. However, both of those companies and their land positions are in the Arctic, where there are no trees, so there really wasn't an opportunity to work with them. So we had to find a different one, and we're optimistic that we're going to be able to share more details about that particular development in the near future. But we believe that we have secured sufficient offsets to cover the entirety of the Pikka Phase 1 emissions profile. And I want to point out that we are not talking about a transaction where a stand of trees is just going to be left to grow as is. This is actually a change in the way that particular forested land is managed. It will have the beneficial impact of generating additional economic activity, local jobs, and so we're excited about what that's going to mean in the future.
I mean, fell a tree and turn it into furniture and then plant another tree on its footprint. Again, you've sequestered carbon, and now you've set up a mechanism to sequester more carbon.
Exactly.
Okay.
So carbon capture and storage is a big deal for us. We have entered into an agreement with ASRC Energy Services and our partner Repsol to pursue carbon capture opportunities here in Alaska. We are focused on competing for federal funding opportunities under the IRA. And those are with the Department of Energy, those funding opportunities. We've already won an award for trialing direct air capture technology, and we're pursuing a point source capture opportunity as well. The differences between those two technologies: Direct air capture is just the general atmosphere. And the carbon dioxide is much more dispersed. And so it's harder to capture carbon from the atmosphere generally and more expensive. There is not presently there's not presently a technology that works at scale and cost to be feasible. But when it comes to the point source capture opportunities, that's far more feasible in that the CO2 is in a much tighter concentration that is technologically and economically easier to capture. And once you capture it, you then need to dispose of it. And for that reason, we are big proponents of the governor's legislation to allow DNR to lease the state's pore space underground and provide for the storage of CO2. And we see lots of opportunities for that here in Alaska, specifically up on the North Slope. There's at Prudhoe Bay in particular, a number of frame 5 generating turbines that would be natural targets for this approach, and plenty of good geology in the area to inject carbon into. So we're pursuing all of that, and think that frankly is the great opportunity here that will allow us to take all of those investments that I mentioned earlier, in terms of those 80,000 barrel per day increments of production, because for our company, regardless of what U.S. or Alaska policy might be, our company, our shareholders require us to offset our emissions in order to spend capital and develop additional resource. So, in order for us to fully develop our acreage and opportunity set, we've got to be able to store carbon, offset carbon, and so that's the way we will be going forward. So,
All right.
as you can see, this is just a nice way to end it. Let's all get to work and do good things.
All right. Well, Joe, thank you so much. Ms. Bradish just thanks you as well in the chat. I saw that. Get a copy. I'll ask. And I can pull a copy of this presentation off of the website, right?
That's
or
right.
It's
the one that's on Basis, so you can find it there.
Okay, cool. All right. Well, I would open up the floor to any questions. We are at the top of the hour, but if Mr. Balash has a moment.
I have a few minutes, sure.
Okay, I will say that this has been a great tale of good corporate citizenship. I really do appreciate that. There's a lot of, frankly, there's a lot of innovation and good thought and frankly good action underpinning this project. It's appreciated. So I will open up the floor. Do you want to go ahead and stop sharing screen, Joe?
Yep.
All right. Do we have any questions? I'm surprised how quiet you've been, Mike. You got anything? Okay, hearing none. Oh, there we go.
No, I'm impressed. Thanks for the report.
I do wonder, what's the wind regime on the North Slope like?
Well, I know that Doyon installed some turbines up there. There were some of the crustier types snickering about that, but I think we're interested to see how they perform.
Right. I mean, it is a pretty harsh environment up there between the cold, but I also understood that again, it's pretty windy, or certainly can be.
Absolutely. Wind has actually been one of our biggest challenges this winter so far. the month of January, we had very few days to work because the wind created phase conditions where it wasn't safe for people to be out, and so they weren't.
Yeah. Okay. All right. Well, it looks like everybody's happy. Joe, I just want to say thank you so much. One thing he didn't mention is he's a UAFer. He's a Nook. Because actually I met Joe
Oh no.
poli-sci
I'm married to a Nook.
all those years ago.
I took a couple classes up there, but I don't get to claim alum status.
Oh, never too late, Joe. Never too late. All right. Well, everybody, I will let you know, I have been booked to do a presentation down in Anchorage next Tuesday. So we'll not be meeting next Tuesday. But I have done some reach outs relative to, frankly, the cook inlet gas situation, and see if we can't get some presentation on that, some discussion on that. But for now, again, thank you so much, Mr. Balash, for being our guest. Thank you very much for the project update. I wanted this group to get it. It's exciting. It's exciting. And yeah, so everybody just have a good rest of your week, a good weekend, and we'll see you soon for your next Energy for Alaska Task Force.
Thank you.